Mingi in Mongdo Township. You can see its location on the map on your screens. This is a village where every witness interviewed by the fact-finding mission identified Tatmadaw soldiers as the main perpetrators, and where a survivor reported the Tatmadaw saying, "We have the order to kill everyone," which is precisely what they tried to do. The fact-finding mission estimates that at least 750 people were killed at Mingi alone. Many were shot, including those who tried to escape by swimming across a river. One survivor described how the military killed those who were hiding. Whoever moved was shot. If they looked up or moved their heads, they were shot. The Tatmadaw rounded up hundreds of Rohingya who could not escape. They separated women and children from the men and systematically killed the men. A witness recounted, "The first round of shooting was like a rain of bullets. The second round was slow as the soldiers killed the men individually. They aimed a gun at each man and shot. The soldiers killed those who had survived gunshot wounds with long knives." The Tatmadaw next turned to the women and children. Some children were shot. Other children were thrown onto a fire. A witness described how the soldiers took infants from their mothers, threw them into the river. Another recounted the slashing of breastfeeding-aged children. Another described seeing soldiers stabbing a 10-year-old boy while he was trying to run away. One survivor told the mission that 7 of her children were killed. Rape was also widespread. At Mingi, the Tatmadaw took women and girls in groups of between 5 and 7 into houses where they were beaten, brutally raped, and frequently stabbed. The young children and infants with them were killed or severely injured, often by stabbing. The houses were then locked and then set on fire. One survivor who escaped from such a burning house recounted, "I entered the house with 4 of my neighbors, and 3 of us had babies. I knew the house. There were dead bodies on the floor, young boys and older men from our village. As we entered the house, the soldiers locked the door. One soldier raped me. They stabbed me in the back of my neck and in my abdomen." She continues, "I was trying to save my baby, who was only 28 days old. But they threw him on the ground and he died. The other women who were there were also raped." Satellite imagery analyzed by UNISAT reveals that Mingi and its associated hamlets, numbering some 440 structures, were completely burned and destroyed. By contrast, a village to the south, inhabited by ethnic Rakhine, a predominantly Buddhist ethnic group, remains intact. What does Myanmar say about Mingi? The answer was given by the spokesperson for Myanmar's agent in this case. He blamed the Rohingya. He said it was the ethnic Rakhine and security forces who had been attacked by what he referred to as hundreds of terrorists. Myanmar likewise denies wrongdoing at any of its other thoroughly documented clearance operations, including the one at Maung Nu in Busidong Township, the location of which you can see on your screens. The operation was carried out by a large group of Tatmadaw soldiers who entered the village in military trucks. A witness recounted that many people were taken to the edge of the hillside and shot. The soldiers approached a compound where a large number of Rohingya had sought shelter and ordered the people to come out of the houses or else the buildings would be set on fire. The soldiers separated women and children from men. At gunpoint, the soldiers ordered the women to remove their headscarves, which they used to blindfold the men and boys and tie their hands behind their backs. The soldiers then opened fire on the men and boys and slit their throats with knives. A witness describes how some of them were shot first, and then their throats were slit with a knife. Others just had their throats slit. The Tatmadaw killed children in the courtyard. One witness recounted, "The soldiers killed the male members of my family. They shot them first and then slit their throats. The courtyard was full of blood. They killed my husband, my father-in-law, and my two nephews of 15 and 8 years old. They even killed the child in the same way." The fact-finding mission estimates that up to 100 people, mostly men and boys, were executed. 28 of the victims were under 18 years old. Women and girls were gang raped, killed, and mutilated. A victim described how 3 members of the military took me. One man held me down and pushed me to the ground. They tore off my clothes. 2 men raped me. One witness saw a woman killed by being knifed in the vagina. Unisat satellite imagery shows that Maung Nu and a neighboring Rohingya village were systematically burned over a period of several days. More than 320 structures were destroyed. The spokesperson for Myanmar's agent in these proceedings dismissed the evidence against the Tatmadaw officer in command of the battalion that carried out this clearance operation as nothing more than what he called unreliable accusations. Myanmar has also refused to acknowledge responsibility for the clearance operation at Pyat Chin in Rasidong Township, which is now shown on your screens. The fact-finding mission determined that hundreds of Tatmadaw soldiers participated. After surrounding the village, they opened fire, shooting at villagers, including those who were fleeing. The perpetrators dragged people from houses and shot them at point-blank range. Others were killed by having their throats slit with large knives. One survivor recounted, "If people were not killed by the gunshots, they were slaughtered to make sure they were really dead." An elderly woman described being pulled from her house with her 70-year-old brother. "Soldiers used rifle butts to beat my brother on the head, and I saw his brains come out. I saw people being killed with long knives. The soldiers were also spraying bullets, and many people were injured and killed. Our village was full of dead bodies. I saw dozens of people killed. First, they shot the people, and then if they were still alive and the body was moving, they used a machete to slaughter across the throat. The Tatmadaw set houses on fire, including those still occupied. Other victims were forced inside houses before they were intentionally set alight. In one house, between 6 and 7 men were forced inside. Those unable to escape were burned alive. The fact-finding mission concluded that the Tatmadaw specifically targeted children, including infants and babies. Some were wrenched from their mother's arms and thrown to the ground. Others were thrown into fires and burned alive. Women and girls were subjected to rape, gang rape, sexual mutilation, and sexual humiliation. The Tatmadaw took some to a makeshift military base where mass gang rape occurred. These victims were subjected to serious physical injuries, either before being raped or after being killed, including the mutilation of their breasts. UNOSAT's analysis of satellite imagery confirms that the entire village was destroyed. By contrast, the nearby non-Rohingya village remains intact. The fact-finding mission estimates that the Tatmadaw killed 358 people at Chutpin. The victims included 127 children, all under the age of 6. What does Myanmar say about Chutpin? Just a routine security operation. The Tatmadaw were searching for militants. No more than 10 people died. There were no rapes. The Rohingya burned their own homes. Mr. President, the fact-finding mission concluded, based on these and other atrocities, that Myanmar's genocidal intent is evidenced by, inter alia, the Tatmadaw's extreme brutality during its attacks on the Rohingya, the organized nature of the Tatmadaw's destruction, and the enormity and nature of the sexual violence perpetrated against women and girls during the clearance operations. The fact-finding mission concluded that further evidence of Myanmar's genocidal intent consists of its lack of accountability or even public condemnation of crimes like those we just reviewed. This conclusion, Mr. President, is consistent with the UN Special Rapporteur's report last month that Myanmar's government allows the military to operate with impunity, even though it is responsible for, in the Special Rapporteur's words, the extreme violence that was inflicted during clearance operations, which were executed on an unprecedented scale and with an unprecedented brutality, all indicators of genocidal intent. Mr. President, members of the court, this concludes my presentation. I thank you for your kind attention and ask that you invite to the podium Ms. Pashpanoscha.
I thank Mr. Lowenstein, and I invite Mrs. Pashpanoscha to take the floor. You have the floor, Madam.
Mr. President, members of the court, good morning. It is an honor for me to appear before you on behalf of the Republic of the Gambia. You have already heard from my colleagues about the genocidal acts that have been committed against the Rohingya by Myanmar up to and through the presentation of the United Nations Fact-Finding Mission report of 16 September 2019. It is my role to address the situation of the approximately 600,000 Rohingya who remain in Myanmar today. Their situation is one of extreme vulnerability, with ongoing acts of genocide against them, and the grave risk that even more heinous atrocities, a new clearance operation, or worse, will be inflicted upon them at any time. As the independent fact-finders have made clear, the evidence of Myanmar's genocidal intentions has actually strengthened over the past year. In the words of the distinguished Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, who passed away just a few months ago, let us be reminded that before there is a final solution, there must be a first solution, a second one, and even a third. The move toward a final solution is not a jump. It takes one step, then another, then another. I will therefore draw your attention to the steps Myanmar is taking currently that reflect its continuing intention to destroy the Rohingya as a group. Each of these steps has been reported by the highly credible, independent, and eminent investigators acting under the authority of the United Nations, intergovernmental organizations, and human rights organizations. Each of these steps heightens the Rohingya's vulnerability, points towards further acts of genocide, and foretells the risk of more violations of the Genocide Convention. The first step is the forceful segregation and confinement of 20% of the Rohingya in internment camps and ghettos, where they are in situations of extreme precariousness. As the UN fact-finding mission reported, Myanmar forcibly transferred over 120,000 Rohingya men, women, and children into displacement camps outside Sitwe town in central Rakhine State in June 2012. For over 7 years now, Myanmar has cordoned them off from the outside world with barbed wire, police checkpoints, and military posts, restricted their movements, subjected them to physical and mental abuse, and maintained them in a state of fear for their survival. They remain in that state, easy targets for the next wave of mass killings, especially as they are guarded by the same Tatmadaw that carried out the clearance operations. Myanmar claims its confinement of the Rohingya in the displacement camps is for their own good. It claims this is necessary to ensure the protection of the communities from intercommunal violence between the ethnic Rakhine and the Rohingya. But as the UN fact-finding mission report points out, Myanmar has not shown how any actual risks justify this extreme and indefinite restriction of movement. At times, Myanmar has simply denied that there are any restrictions on the interned Rohingya population. Yet, as the UN fact-finding mission observed, the existence of the restrictions on the movement of the displaced population is undeniable. It is attested by the checkpoints and signboards at the entry of the camps, the barbed wires, the experience of those trying to leave the camps, and the simple fact that over 120,000 people have not been able to go back to their place of origin despite their desire to do so. Myanmar has confined a separate group of Rohingya in the Aung Mingala quarter of Sitwe town. The UN fact-finding mission explained that this quarter is effectively a closed ghetto where Muslims are trapped and have lived separately from the rest of the population since 2012. It is guarded by armed police, checkpoints, and barbed wire. The Tatmadaw maintains a small presence in the school grounds. People can only leave the quarter with special permission and in organized convoys with police escorts. The remaining 80% of the Rohingya reside in villages under close watch by the Tatmadaw. The UN fact-finding mission's September 2018 report explained that these Rohingya are required to obtain travel permits to leave their villages, and they're generally not permitted to travel to ethnic Rakhine areas, including the main towns and markets. The September 2019 report indicated that the restrictions have increased in severity over the past year. It noted that the government currently restricts the freedom of movement of Rohingya through a combination of local orders, verbal instructions, security checkpoints, soldiers, and patrols, which have the cumulative effect of confining them to their villages and camps. The UN fact-finding mission has concluded that this state-mandated segregation fosters a conducive environment for dehumanization and hate campaigns. Yet, Myanmar is building more internment camps for those Rohingya who have not yet been interned. Refugees arriving in Bangladesh informed the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that the Tatmadaw is forcing men and children as young as 12 years of age to perform unpaid work on 12-hour shifts to build houses in camp-like facilities in different locations in northern Rakhine State. According to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, one interviewee stated, the inhabitants of his village, which was largely untouched by the violence of 2017, were informed by the village administrator that they would be removed from their homes to a newly constructed camp. Other interviewees described the camps as closed areas with only one entry gate, surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers. Yet another interviewee expressed fears that the camps had been built with the objective of forcing the Rohingya to live in miserable conditions with the eventual intention of exterminating them. Mr. President, the extermination of the Rohingya, who have been rounded up into internment camps and closely guarded ghettos and villages, can come swiftly at any time in the form of new clearance operations perpetrated by security forces who are stationed there. Or it can occur in slow motion through denying them food and other essentials of life. The UN fact-finding mission, in its most recent report, found that while the former method of destruction could be resumed at any time, the latter method is already in progress. The government has severely restricted access to food for Rohingya in Rakhine State, and the resulting food insecurity is being caused by government laws and policies. Article 2C of the Genocide Convention identifies deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about a group's physical destruction in whole or in part as a genocidal act. Myanmar is implementing its policy of denying food to the Rohingya by various means, including its widespread confiscation of agricultural lands on which the Rohingya grew crops, essential to their survival. The UN fact-finding mission determined that Myanmar is undertaking a concerted effort to confiscate these lands. The ongoing confiscations extend beyond the Rohingya villages that Myanmar destroyed during the clearance operations. Rohingya-owned and cultivated land has now been confiscated in areas of northern Rakhine State, where Rohingya remained. Members of the Rohingya group are no longer allowed to consume products from their own lands following the confiscation. The UN fact-finding mission explained that the Tatmadaw is also depriving the Rohingya of food by deliberately killing or confiscating their livestock without permission or payment. One interviewee who fled Butchidang Township explained how this was conducted in his case. Military, police, members of ethnic Rakhine constantly came to the village and looted everything, including food items. The military took away my 7 cows that I was grassing in the hillside. I cultivated rice in my land, When it was ready for harvesting, members of ethnic Rakhine snatched the harvest. I was left with nothing except 2 goats, which I had to offer to the military for my release. As the UN Special Rapporteur reported, based on the evidence it found, there appears to be a policy of forced starvation in place, designed to make life in northern Rakhine unsustainable for the Rohingya who remain there. The Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women made the very same determination earlier this year. Mr. President, a further step Myanmar is taking against the Rohingya as a group is the intensified effort to force them to accept national verification cards that explicitly recognize cardholders as non-citizens and brand them as Bengalis. While the Rohingya are loath to accept the national verification cards, which erode their right to the identity, without them, they are denied access to essential life-saving and life-supporting foods and goods and services. The UN fact-finding mission has found that all of these steps, the manner in which the government deprives Rohingya of land, the manner in which the government imposes movement restrictions and deprivation of food, and the manner in which the government denies the Rohingya their identity and deprives them of the rights people need to survive and live with dignity, are ongoing and support a conclusion that the government continues to harbor genocidal intent and that the Rohingya remain under serious risk of genocide. As the UN fact-finding mission concluded just 2 months ago, the Rohingya remain the target of a government attack aimed at erasing their identity and removing them from Myanmar. And this has caused them great suffering. The laws, policies, and practices that formed the basis of the government's persecution against the Rohingya have been maintained. Their plight can only be considered as having deteriorated. Similarly, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar stated just 2 weeks ago, the system of oppression the Rohingya are subjected to remains unchanged, and they are at real risk of recurring genocide. Mr. President, if the Rohingya are to be protected against further acts of genocide, it will be up to the court to order the provisional measures that are necessary for their protection. There is no other alternative. Certainly, Myanmar cannot be counted on to protect them from itself. In the past few years, it has appointed numerous commissions to investigate the genocidal acts that have been reported by the UN fact-finding mission and other international observers. None of Myanmar's commissions have found any violations of internationally protected rights. As the UN Commissioner for Human Rights concluded earlier this year, the establishment of commissions of inquiry has become routine after cyclical episodes of violence in Myanmar, with 8 such commissions having been established since 2012. None of the previous commissions has led to the prosecution of any Tatmadaw official. All have been exonerated. Likewise, the UN fact-finding mission concluded in September of this year, Myanmar is not meeting its obligations under the Genocide Convention to conduct an independent criminal investigation into allegations of genocide. The mission draws this conclusion based on the government's pattern of ignoring compelling evidence that genocide took place on its territory and its failure to put in place investigative mechanisms that are independent, prompt, thorough, effective, credible, and transparent. Typical of Myanmar's own investigative mechanisms is its advisory board for the Committee for Recommendations on Rakhine State. It is one of a very few that included international members. Among them was Ambassador Bill Richardson, a former US representative to the United Nations. He resigned after the first round of meetings, denouncing the board's so-called investigation as a whitewash. Kobsak Chutikul, a Thai diplomat who served as the board's secretary, quit soon thereafter, expressing his concern that the board's existence was going to divert attention from the issues, give a false impression that things are being done. Instead, he said, Myanmar government officials did no more than defend the line that this is an internal matter. We are handling it. We haven't done anything wrong. This is a false narrative. Mr. President, it is Myanmar's narrative that is false. It is also reprehensible. This is what the chairperson of a state-level investigative committee said about the widespread and well-documented rape of Rohingya women. He said it was inconceivable because they are very dirty. The Bengali Rohingya women have a very low standard of living and poor hygiene. They are not attractive, so neither the local Buddhist men nor the soldiers are interested in them. The chairperson of Myanmar's investigative committee was not the only one to categorically deny that Tatmadaw soldiers have raped Rohingya women. What you see now before you, and at tab 18 of your judges' folders, is a current screenshot from the Facebook page of Myanmar's agent in these proceedings. As you can see, the Facebook page insisting fake rape belongs to the Myanmar State Consular Office. Mr. President, members of the court, in the Gambia's view, Myanmar's false narratives, like these, and its sham investigations further demonstrate the need for you to order provisional measures to compel it to live up to its obligations under the Genocide Convention during the pendency of these proceedings to protect the Rohingya from recurring acts of genocide. Next, my colleagues will show how each of the requirements for provisional measures set out in Article 41 of the court statute is fully satisfied, and they will describe the specific provisional measures that are called for in these exigent circumstances. I thank you for your kind attention and ask that you call next to the podium, after the break if you are so disposed, Mr. Arsalan Suleiman, who will address the court on its prima facie jurisdiction over the Gambia's claims.
I thank Mrs. Pasi Panojja. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, the court will observe a coffee break of 10 minutes. The sitting is adjourned.